We're back here with another episode of Section 415, and our guest today is the San Francisco Standard's baseball reporter, John Shea. John, thanks so much for joining us. Busy week for you.
Yeah, how about that, Kerry? We didn't know this was happening, say, back in July when it was almost a done deal that Bob Melvin would return in 26. Look what's happened.
Look what's happened indeed. Tony Vitello, the head coach at the University of Tennessee, is now the manager of the San Francisco Giants, an almost unprecedented leap into Major League Baseball. And let's kick things off right away, John. This is our first headline. The Giants are making a landmark hire here in pulling someone from the college level to the big leagues. What was your first reaction when you realized that this was a very real possibility for Buster Posey in this organization?
Buster Posey, the two key words here. Name another general manager who would have done this and appeased ownership and a fan base in the process. I'm not sure there is anybody who could have pulled this off. Uh, the fan base is desperate. The ownership is desperate. They see every year the Dodgers in first place. They see every year the Dodgers go deep into the postseason. They see every year the Giants finish 500. Okay, it's not working. So what do? You go outside the box, way outside the box, way outside the diamond in this case, and you pull a guy out of Tennessee who's 47 years old, who's never played pro ball, never coached in pro ball, never managed in pro ball. And now he's taken over one of the signature franchises in Major League Baseball history. And the well-decorated president of baseball operations, Buster Posey, who is a Hall of Fame catcher and also a three-time World Series champion. It goes on and on and on, his record. He's bold. He's daring. He does things, going back to Adames and Chapman and Devers and, how he handled Bob Melvin. It's just, okay. To me, Kerry, it's fascinating that he's even still in the spot. I said it when he was hired. I'll say it now. I'm still fascinated and in awe that this man took the time away from his family, his retirement. He didn't have to do this. He didn't need the publicity. He didn't need any credit. He didn't need his name on the marquee or billboards or buses. But here he is pulling off some wild stuff and talking about the Dodgers. Maybe this is his way of saying, you know what? The conventional stuff doesn't work. I've learned that in my year one at the helm. Let's try this.
Let's try this indeed. Tony Vitello set to be introduced as the San Francisco Giants manager at a press conference at Oracle Park next Thursday. You'll be there. I'll be there. Like you said, fascinated to see the dynamic between Posey, a superstar player who came back to run the organization that he starred for, and Tony Vitello, who's never worked a day in his life in Major League Baseball. John, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the process here, because at the outset, I think you and I were kind of aligned. We both felt that Posey would probably interview some former catchers, maybe some former teammates. We knew that Nick Hundley was a favorite. And yet it still leads to this unconventional hire that breaks the mold. How do you think the Giants ultimately landed on Vitello based on what we knew initially about Posey's parameters for this process?
Well, great question. You're right. It seemed like this is the second choice. And in these recent days, if Vitello said, you know what, I'm staying at Tennessee. I love it here. It's a great culture. I'm successful. I'm making big coin. Then Posey would have had to say, okay, who's our third choice? And you keep going down the list. He would have been fine with Nick Hundley. I think he would have been fine maybe with one or two others that he interviewed. We did report it was Brandon Hyde at one point that he spoke with early in the process. He spoke with maybe a half a dozen people, I would guess. But in this case, we had that source, that industry source saying that, this probably was the guy who told him, I can take down the Dodgers. And nobody else would be that bold to say that. This dude is bold. I mean, you look at his track record, and I've tried to read every word out of Knoxville and go to every podcast he's been in. And I don't think I'm still prepared to cover this guy. I mean, there's still so much more we need to know about him. We need to learn. I mean, how is he going to manage a big league game? This isn't like a doubleheader with 7 innings on on each end. This isn't metal bats. This isn't, hey, you guys get home now. You got finals tomorrow. This isn't, hey, I'm in your living room. Yeah, I'd love to recruit your high school kid and bring him to Knoxville. These are grown men. These are major leaguers. These are accomplished ball players who have all kinds of money in the bank, security, families. How's that transition going to work? I mean, we're all skeptical, right? Because we haven't seen it. We haven't seen it played out. So only Buster Posey knows for sure, and maybe he doesn't even know how this is going to play out. But it remains a surprise. And I was just thinking this morning, when he arrives at the winter meetings, all eyes are going to be on this guy. I thought the same with Buster Posey last year, his first time uh, at the winter meetings, when all the industry gets together, the owners, the scouts, the agents, the media, all officials in the front office. And when Buster Posey and Tony Vitello walk down a hallway, you're going to notice those two guys. Because it's unlike any other partnership in Major League Baseball.
The Giants are the attraction right now. Headline number one, the Giants hire Tony Vitello out of the University of Tennessee and make the college head coach, 2024 College World Series champion, their manager. Headline number two, John, Friday morning, we discussed this right before we sat down to record this episode. Tony Vitello released a very interesting statement to Knoxville media on Friday, and he opened it up by saying, I've accepted the job to be Drew Gilbert's babysitter as a full-time babysitter for the Giants outfielder at the Major League level. Gilbert, of course, played at the University of Tennessee and was a star for the volunteer program under Vitello. But there were also some very candid thoughts that he shared, how difficult this decision was, how he went back and forth in his own mind, determining whether or not he would actually accept this position after it was reported on Saturday that the Giants were closing in on this hire, after we said in the San Francisco Standard, expect the unexpected. What did you think of Vitello's statement to Knoxville media?
Yeah, that's right. And going back to last Saturday, expect the unexpected. We did heavily play up Tony Vitello. I think it all started that morning with Tim Kawakami tweeting and going on social media that, hey, fans, be prepared. Something's coming down here. Um, he knew. As we reported, he was either the favorite or right there at the top at the time. And then a couple hours later, it kind of blew up nationally. Um, and then, a couple of days later, we reported the figures 3.5, 3.5, 3.5 with a vesting option in a fourth year. But going to the statement that he released, it's almost like he doesn't want to leave Knoxville. This was not a big press conference. This was like 5 people he selected. Hey, I'm going to issue a statement tomorrow. And it's just a bunch of scribbled notes on the back of, University of Tennessee paper, and that he had in the baseball office probably. And he scribbled it down and then read it. And it was emotional. Vol for life. It's almost like he said, I'm never leaving here. This is my home. I'll be back. But he mentioned, the fans, the stadium. By the way, Lindsey Nelson Stadium, the former broadcaster, former Giants broadcaster, late 70s, early 80s. I think he replaced Joe Angel in the booth when Angel moved on. But Lindsey Nelson is a Hall of Fame broadcaster. He went to Tennessee. I think he started a radio program out there, and he had the name of the stadium named after him. So there's your Giant connection. But it just seemed that he has so much connection there. I could see now, based on the statement that I read today, that it was really hard for him to make a choice, and it didn't happen immediately. I imagine a lot of people in the business, in the industry, said, "Hey, man, you got to take this job, not just for yourself, but for the next guy in college who's maybe going to follow your path."
I think that's one of the most interesting parts of all of this, John, is that there are only 30 major league manager jobs, but I'm not so sure that Tony Vitello would have jumped for any job out there. I think that there are maybe 5 or 6, and you probably put the Giants in that category, that he would have been willing to leave Knoxville to go and take. And it took him 4 or 5 days to make this decision, potentially, when the Giants first really started showing that he was the final candidate on Saturday for the job, and he doesn't officially get announced as manager until Wednesday. Let's say the A's or the Marlins or the Pirates or a team that doesn't spend a lot is the team to offer the SEC head coach. Maybe he's still coaching at Tennessee, but you have to figure the lure of working with Buster Posey, the lure of coming to an organization that has invested a lot in Tennessee, in Drew Gilbert, in Blade Tidwell, and Gavin Keelan, their first round draft pick this year. That probably had something to do with the comfort level of making this decision in my mind.
I was told by somebody who's pretty close to Buster that he would not have made that choice based on what you just said. It's so much bigger than that. Braves, yes. A's, no. Right? Braves closer to Tennessee. A's play in a minor league ballpark. Who knows what they're doing? Um, so yeah, the Giants are. I mean, there are connections. What is it? Buster's sister is married to an assistant football coach at Tennessee, and whether that's how the relationship between him and Vitello started, we'll know Thursday exactly how that all reached fruition. Um, yeah, it's fascinating. I'd love to hear from you, man, because you were there with Gabe Kapler, and you were there with Bochy, and you saw that transition, and now we're seeing the transition from Melvin to Vitello. Any similarities?
I mean, not to cross sports, but I think that, and you wrote this for the San Francisco Standard, when a manager or a head coach is fired, typically the executive in charge of the search for their replacement goes in the
Yeah.
opposite direction. And the first time I experienced this was covering college football. I covered Todd Graham, who reminded me a little bit of Tony Vitello. He was the head coach at Arizona State. He invigorated the football program with energy, talking about discipline, talking about fundamentals. And when Graham kind of flamed out at the end, the athletic director there, Ray Anderson, hired an NFL head coach in Herm Edwards, who was just the polar opposite in terms of his energy level. And Herm's program just deteriorated. It went off the rails. There were all sorts of recruiting violations. And so what did they do but go back and get the youngest head coach in college
Hmm.
football? You go from one of the oldest coaches with NFL experience to the youngest coach in college football. And we've seen this play out with the San Francisco Giants, John. You've seen Bruce Bochy, one of the most established, respected managers in all of baseball, a future Hall of Famer. He'll be in Cooperstown very soon. And you go to Gabe Kapler, a spark plug, someone who was different in every way, shape, or form. As the Giants at that time, Larry Baer and Farhan Zaidi talked about this, were trying to become the next gen organization. Well, next gen only took them to 2021. It didn't take them beyond that. So after 2 years of failures, you bring back the Bochy type figure in Bob Melvin. And now, if Bob Melvin wasn't the right guy for the job, which Buster Posey decided 3 months after picking up his option, then you go to Tony Vitello, who is much more similar to Gabe Kapler than he is to Bruce Bochy. Now, Giants folks will tell you he's a better relationship builder. He cultivates his relationships with his players, with his coaches on a much more deep level. But these things just swing back and forth. It's really fascinating when you look at the big picture here. So let's talk big picture here. Let's get to headline number 3. And that is, we are now 12 plus months in to Buster Posey's tenure as the president of baseball operations. And if you can sum it up in any way, to me, John, it's bold moves and it's a sense of urgency that so many other executives simply don't show.
My word is evolve. Buster Posey took this job thinking, I'm more of an old school guy. I played for Bochy in spring training. I'm going to bring in a dozen former players, which Farhan Zaidi never wanted to do. He didn't want that outside influence. He wanted his own guys, coaching techniques their own way, which maybe conflicted with the way Will Clark or Barry Bonds or any of these other guys that Buster brought in last spring. But he maintained a relationship, or he built a relationship with Bob Melvin, didn't really know him, but stood by him, supported him, said all good things about him. And on July 1st, when he handed him when he exercised the option for 26, his comment was, if there's anyone to blame, blame me. So I've never heard any GM say that. It's always blame the players, blame the manager. You're fired. We got to get new players. That's the talking point of a general manager, and I've covered him forever. And for Buster Posey to stand up and say, "Blame me," that he was evolving, and then I think he realized in the second half, you know what? we really need more of a mix. Day one, he did say analytics is not going away, remember? But still, he leaned on Bob Melvin making the calls, which Bob Melvin wasn't really given the opportunity to do under Farhan Zaidi. So it's kind of his show, his lineups, his bullpen moves, when to remove a starter. And I think Buster evolved, and maybe Zach Managian was in his ear, the analytics department was in his ear. And they all kind of said, you know what, I think we need to collaborate a little bit more and make decisions as a whole, not as just a one manager. So I think from there we've gotten to the point of in 26. I think Buster and Zach and the analytics department will have a lot more say on what goes on down on the field. So in that way, Buster has evolved, and I've seen it from day one to day 365 and beyond. And that's cool. I mean, when he first took this job, he said, "Hey, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to learn. I'm going to listen to everybody." I remember asking him at the GM meetings. I said, "Who are your mentors?" And he said, "Everybody." Farhan Zaidi never said everybody. He was his own mentor. He had the hammer. He decided everything. But for Buster to be open, and the story we wrote early in the season about knocking down that wall, remember in the broadcast level of the press box, first thing Zach and Buster did was knock down a wall between two small booths that were so small that maybe even, you know, Farhan and maybe one or two others could fit in, and the other one went vacant. So now you knock it down, you got this huge booth, and they have 12 to 15 people up there every night discussing. Buster more inclusive than Farhan. That game, what's next? How can we get better? So he really relies on his inner circle, and to his credit. So I think he's really involved, and it'll be interesting to see how this plays out in year two. And when I asked at the last press conference, how long do you want to do this? Because it was a 3-year commitment. He said, I would like to do it for more than 3 years. So that's encouraging for Giant fans.
Absolutely. So our three headlines as we tape this episode here of Section 415, the Giants have hired Tony Vitello, a landmark hire in Major League Baseball. Tony Vitello has then released a statement to Knoxville media talking about how difficult this transition was for him, how difficult this decision was for him to go to the college level, to the Major League level. And headline number 3, Buster Posey, 12 plus months in, still moving with bold actions and urgency. John Shea, when we come back, we will wrap up Section 415 with a deeper dive into Buster Posey's nearly unprecedented move to bring in a college head coach and install him as the manager of a Major League franchise. All right, as we continue to dive into the Giants hire of Tony Vitello, we're talking with John Shea, San Francisco Standard baseball reporter who has covered managerial transitions from the San Francisco Giants, from the Oakland A's, and down in San Diego with the Padres. John, you're a veteran of this. You've written extensively about kind of the most interesting and fascinating transitions. I would imagine this would have to qualify, but this is the only time big shakeups have happened in your career that you've covered.
You're right. I think I learned early on, as you did, with Bochy to Kapler and your example at ASU, that the opposites follow. And that was never more the case than when I covered Dick Williams in the 80s down in San Diego. He was gruff. He was mean. Nobody liked him. He didn't care. He didn't like anybody else. He went months without talking to players. Tim Flannery once said, once I'm out of this game, I'm going to run him over with my car. That's how much that love affair was between manager and players. And we'd go in his room after a tough game, and he would say, everyone in here, you saw it, you write it. And then he stormed out. And I said, okay, that's a little different than modern times. And so when he left, they brought in a fellow named Steve Boras. And Steve Boras was a manager in Oakland when Ricky showed up. And so he was kind of a baseball lifer, a friend of Jack McKeon, the GM. So he brought him in. Total opposite. Nicest guy in the world, probably the nicest manager in history. But players took advantage of him. And I remember vividly one day we went up to Goose Gossett, who blew a save. And he said, yeah, Skipper says you were tired out there. He said, Skip said what? So he stormed into the manager's office, and by then Boris was in the shower, which was right in line with the office, right inside the office. And Boris opened the door and said, "You never tell these guys I'm tired." And Boris, who's got suds and couldn't barely see, looks out naked. He says, "Hey Goose, can we talk about this later?" "I'll talk about it now. Don't ever tell these guys I'm tired." But anyway, when he was gone, who did they replace him with? Larry Boa, who was a mini me of Dick Williams, who was just as gruff. And I remember they opened the season his first year at Candlestick Park, played the Giants. Well, big hopes, big dreams. The Giants swept them. And in the visiting clubhouse, in the manager's office, Larry Boa, his first comment was, "I'm horse bleep. The coaches are horse bleep. The players are horse bleep. We're all bleeping horse bleep." And I'm thinking, oh man, this is going to be a long season. I'm still just a kid covering this stuff, but that's how dramatic these changes can be. And that's how dramatic this one is, from Bob Melvin to Tony Vitello.
One thing I've also learned through this whole process of covering managerial transitions and different sports, different teams is there's no one way to have success. I think Giants fans will tell you that, well, Bruce Bochy's way is the best way. And that's because he won 3 titles in San Francisco. But we've also seen around Major League Baseball, you look at 2016, the Chicago Cubs, who really changed the sport. Joe Madden was so analytics focused, and what they did really ushered in a modern era that I think still has its imprints all over the way that teams operate these days. Can Tony Vitello work? We haven't seen anyone like him come into the big leagues, a college coach, someone who bleeds and oozes passion, energy, fire, enthusiasm. But for a 60 to 70 game season at Tennessee, can this work in the major leagues? And do you think that the Giants will give him a chance? The Giants players, John?
That's a big question. You mentioned Joe Madden. He mentions Joe Madden in a podcast I heard with Greg Olson. He mentioned Joe Madden. He loved that 2016 Cubs team managed by Joe Madden. He loved the fact that everybody said, "Hey, let's make history. We're going to do something nobody else has done in more than a century, and that's win a World Series at Wrigley Field." And he idolized Joe Madden almost. And he spoke also about that '93 Phillies team, which was made up of a whole bunch of characters, from Dalton to Dykstra, and to Kruk, and all the way down. And what's the bottom line? What's the common denominator? He loves personalities. He loves characters. He loves guys being themselves, and he's going to encourage this Giants team, all these players, be themselves. We might not see 26 Drew Gilberts, gnawing on Robbie Ray's sleeve every day and jumping over the rail from the dugout. But I think we will see maybe more openness, and more of themselves come out during the season, which is a good thing. That's the modern game. But I think, yeah, Joe Madden is a good example. And I think what he has to do, and I'm sure he's done it already, is get a hold of Chapman, get a hold of Adames, get a hold of Devers, and get a hold of Webb. And have those guys buy in, because once those guys buy in, if they do, everyone else will. And, some of them have been quoted, but it doesn't really matter what they say now. It's what they will do once they're on the grass, once they're on the infield, once they show up at spring training. Will they play for this guy? Once the season opens in late March against the Yankees, will they play for this guy? And only then will we know. But all eyes will be on the Giants this year. And fans want to know, other executives want to know, because are we going to take somebody from LSU? Are we going to take somebody from Missouri? Who should we get if we want to follow what Buster Posey's doing?
Well, it all begins next Thursday, October 30th, Oracle Park, the highly, highly anticipated Tony Vitello introductory press conference. We will be out there covering it for the San Francisco Standard. And John, I would imagine as you interact with Vitello throughout the winter meetings, off-season discussions, we'll continue to pick your brain right here on Section 415. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Kerry.